The desert wind whispered secrets across the red rocks of Arizona as Marcus Thompson rode his horse slowly along the narrow canyon trail. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Marcus had been traveling for 3 days straight, searching for wild mustangs that had been reported in this remote area. As a horse trainer and rancher, he made his living capturing and taming wild horses, then selling them to settlers moving west. Marcus was a tall, lean man with weathered hands and kind eyes that spoke of someone who understood animals better than most people. He had grown up on a ranch in Texas, learning from his father how to read the land and respect the creatures that lived on it. Unlike many men of his time, Marcus believed that taking from nature should be done with care and gratitude, not greed and violence. As darkness began to fall, Marcus knew he would need to find shelter soon. The desert could be dangerous at night, with wild animals and sudden temperature drops that could catch an unprepared traveler off guard. He guided his horse, a sturdy brown mare named Dusty, toward what looked like a small canyon that might offer protection from the wind. The sound reached him before he could see anything. It was a deep, rumbling noise that seemed to come from the earth itself, followed by what sounded like someone calling for help. Marcus stopped his horse and listened carefully. The desert played tricks on travelers sometimes, creating sounds where none existed, but this seemed real and urgent. Following the sound deeper into the canyon, Marcus came upon a sight that made his heart race. A massive boulder, easily weighing several tons, had somehow shifted and now pinned a man against the canyon wall. But this was no ordinary man. Even in the dim twilight, Marcus could see that the trapped figure was enormous, standing at least 7 feet tall with broad shoulders and long black hair that fell past his waist. The giant man was conscious, but clearly in great pain. His legs were trapped beneath the boulder, and blood stained the ground around him. When he saw Marcus approaching, his dark eyes showed a mixture of hope and suspicion. Marcus could tell from the man's clothing and the feathers in his hair that he was Apache, one of the native tribes that lived in these mountains. Marcus had heard stories about the Apache people. Most white settlers feared them, calling them savage and dangerous. But Marcus had also heard other stories from older ranchers who spoke of Apache wisdom, their deep connection to the land, and their fierce loyalty to family and tribe. Looking at this trapped man, Marcus saw not a savage, but a human being in desperate need of help. Without hesitation, Marcus dismounted and approached the giant carefully. The Apache man watched him warily, probably expecting Marcus to either run away or perhaps even take advantage of his helpless situation. Instead, Marcus knelt down and examined the boulder, trying to figure out how it could be moved. The Apache man spoke in his native language, words that Marcus could not understand, but which sounded urgent and grateful. Marcus looked into the man's eyes and nodded, trying to communicate that he intended to help. He pointed to himself and said, "Marcus," then pointed to the Apache man with a questioning look. The giant man seemed to understand. He placed his hand on his chest and said, "Ayana," though Marcus suspected this might be a name or perhaps just a word in Apache. The important thing was that they were now trying to communicate, and the Apache man seemed willing to trust Marcus, at least for now. Marcus walked around the boulder, studying it from every angle. The massive rock had clearly fallen from somewhere high up on the canyon wall, probably loosened by recent rains that had been washing through the desert. It was wedged in such a way that it would be impossible for one man to move it, even someone as strong as Marcus. Looking at his horse, Marcus got an idea. Dusty was strong and well-trained, used to pulling heavy loads on the ranch. If he could somehow attach a rope to the boulder and use Dusty's strength, he might be able to shift enough to free the trapped Apache man. Marcus always carried a strong rope with his gear, along with various tools needed for his work with horses. He retrieved the rope from his saddlebags and began examining the boulder more closely, looking for a place where he could secure it. The problem was that the boulder was round and smooth on most sides, offering few places where a rope could get a good grip. After several minutes of searching, Marcus found a small outcropping of rock near the top of the boulder where he might be able to loop his rope. But reaching it would require climbing up on the boulder itself, which could be dangerous. If he slipped, or if the boulder shifted while he was on top of it, he could end up trapped as well, or worse. The Apache man had been watching Marcus work, and seemed to understand what Marcus was trying to do. He spoke again in his language, his voice urgent, but not panicked. Marcus got the impression that the man was either encouraging him or perhaps warning him about something. Marcus decided to take the risk. He carefully climbed up on the boulder, testing each step to make sure the massive rock would not shift under his weight. The Apache man below him was completely quiet now, probably holding his breath as Marcus worked above him. One wrong move could make the situation much worse for both of them. Finally, Marcus managed to secure the rope around the small rock outcropping. He climbed down and tied the other end to Dusty's saddle, making sure the knots were strong and would not slip under pressure. This was going to require perfect timing and a bit of luck. If the boulder moved too quickly or in the wrong direction, it could crush the Apache man instead of freeing him. Marcus led Dusty into position and gave the horse the command to pull. Dusty was used to following Marcus's commands and trusted him completely. She began to pull steadily against the rope, her muscles straining as she tried to move the enormous weight of the boulder. At first, nothing happened. The boulder seemed as immovable as the mountain itself. But Marcus encouraged Dusty to keep trying, and gradually he began to see small movements in the rock. Tiny pebbles started to fall from around its base, and there was a slight creaking sound as the boulder began to shift ever so slightly. The Apache man must have felt the change in pressure on his trapped legs. He began speaking rapidly in his language, and Marcus could hear both pain and hope in his voice. Marcus continued to encourage Dusty, knowing that this was probably their only chance. If the rope broke or if the boulder settled back into its original position, there would be no way to try again. Suddenly, with a grinding sound that echoed through the canyon, the boulder rolled several inches to one side. It was not much, but it might be enough. Marcus quickly commanded Dusty to stop pulling, afraid that too much movement might cause the boulder to roll back or fall in a different direction. The Apache man immediately began trying to pull himself free from the space that had opened up. His legs were clearly injured, and he was in considerable pain, but he managed to drag himself out from under the boulder's weight. As soon as he was clear, Marcus released the tension on the rope, and the boulder settled back down with a thunderous crash. Both men sat in the dust for a moment, breathing heavily from the exertion and stress of the rescue. Marcus looked at the Apache man's injuries and could see that his legs were badly bruised and possibly broken. There was blood on his clothes, and he would not be able to walk for some time. Marcus knew that he could not simply leave an injured man alone in the desert, regardless of what tribe he came from. The nights were cold, and there were wild animals in the area that would be attracted to the smell of blood. Without help, the Apache man would probably not survive until morning. Using gestures and simple words, Marcus tried to communicate that he wanted to help treat the man's injuries. The Apache man seemed to understand and nodded his agreement. Marcus retrieved his water flask and some clean cloth from his saddlebags. He had learned basic first aid from his father, who had always said that a rancher needed to know how to treat both animals and people in emergencies. As Marcus cleaned the wounds, he was struck by how quietly the Apache man endured the pain. There were no complaints or cries of distress, just a steady breathing that showed incredible self-control. Marcus had known cowboys who would have been screaming from injuries far less severe than these. When he had done what he could to clean and bandage the wounds, Marcus helped the Apache man move to a more comfortable position against the canyon wall. Then he gathered wood and built a small fire to provide warmth and light through the night. He shared his food and water, and gradually the two men began to relax around each other. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared overhead, Marcus found himself wondering about this giant Apache man. Who was he? What had brought him to this remote canyon alone? Did he have family somewhere who were worried about him? Marcus wished he could speak the Apache language so he could learn more about his unexpected companion. The Apache man seemed to be thinking similar thoughts. He studied Marcus with intelligent eyes, as if trying to understand what kind of white man would risk his life to save a stranger from a different tribe. Most white settlers in this area saw the Apache as enemies to be feared and avoided. Yet here was Marcus, sharing his fire and food with someone he had never met before. As the night wore on, both men took turns resting while the other kept watch. Marcus noticed that even injured and in pain, the Apache man remained alert to every sound in the darkness around them. This was clearly someone who had lived his entire life in the wilderness and knew how to survive in dangerous situations. Near dawn, Marcus was awakened by the sound of horses approaching the canyon. The Apache man was already awake and listening intently. From his expression, Marcus could tell that these were not random travelers, but people the Apache man recognized. Marcus felt a moment of fear, wondering if he was about to be surrounded by Apache warriors who might not appreciate finding a white man with one of their people. The sound of the approaching horses grew louder, and Marcus could hear voices calling out in the Apache language. The giant man beside him called back, his voice strong despite his injuries. There was relief in his tone, and Marcus began to hope that these were friends coming to help, not enemies preparing for a fight. Soon, a group of Apache riders appeared at the entrance to the canyon. Marcus counted at least a dozen men, all armed and mounted on swift horses. They rode with the confidence of people who knew this land like their own backyard. When they saw Marcus sitting by the fire with their injured companion, they stopped and stared in obvious surprise. The giant Apache man began speaking rapidly to the newcomers, gesturing toward Marcus and pointing to the boulder that had trapped him. Marcus could not understand the words, but he could hear gratitude in the man's voice as he told his story. The other Apache men listened intently, their expressions changing from suspicion to amazement as they heard what had happened. One of the riders dismounted and approached the fire. He was older than the others, with gray streaks in his long hair and the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. Marcus guessed that this was probably a chief or at least a senior warrior. The man looked at Marcus for a long moment, then said something in heavily accented English. "You saved Diana?" the older man asked, pronouncing each word carefully. Marcus nodded and pointed to the boulder. "He was trapped. I had to help." The older man translated this to the others, and Marcus heard murmurs of discussion among the group. Some of the warriors looked skeptical, as if they could not believe a white man would risk himself to save an Apache. Others seemed impressed and grateful. The giant man, whom Marcus now knew was indeed called Iana, continued talking to the group, obviously giving more details about the rescue. Marcus heard his own name mentioned several times, and saw several of the warriors looking at him with what appeared to be newfound respect. As the sun rose fully and brought warmth to the canyon, the Apache men helped Iana onto one of their horses. His injuries were serious enough that he would need proper care from the tribal medicine man, but he was alive and would recover thanks to Marcus's intervention. Before they left, the older man approached Marcus again. "I am Chief Nailnish," he said in his careful English. "Iana is my son. You saved his life." The chief paused, as if choosing his words very carefully. "This creates debt between us. Sacred debt." Marcus was not sure what this meant, but he could tell from the chief's tone that it was something very important. "I only did what anyone should do," Marcus replied. "I could not leave a man to die." Chief Nailnish shook his head. "Not anyone. Most white men would have ridden away, or worse. You stayed. You risked yourself. This makes you different." The chief spoke to his men in Apache, and several of them approached Marcus with what appeared to be gifts. One offered him a beautifully crafted knife with a bone handle. Another presented him with a small pouch made of soft leather and decorated with colorful beads. Marcus was touched by their generosity, but tried to refuse the gifts. "I do not need payment for helping someone," he said. Again, Chief Nailnish shook his head. "Not payment. Honor gifts. You showed honor to our people. We show honor to you." He paused again, then added, "You are welcome in our land. Anytime, my people will know you as friend." As the Apache group prepared to leave with the injured Iana, the chief approached Marcus one final time. "What is your name, friend to Apache?" he asked. "Marcus Thompson," Marcus replied. Chief Nailnish repeated the name several times, as if committing it to memory. "Marcus Thompson, you have saved the life of a chief's son. In Apache law, this creates bond that cannot be broken. Someday, I will repay this debt. This I promise you." With that, the Apache riders departed, carrying the injured Iana with them toward their homeland in the mountains. Marcus watched them go, still not fully understanding what had just happened, but feeling that his life had somehow changed in ways he could not yet comprehend. As he packed his gear and prepared to continue his own journey, Marcus reflected on the strange events of the past night. He had come to this canyon searching for wild horses, and instead had found something much more valuable, a connection with people he had been taught to fear and avoid. The desert around him looked the same as it had the day before, but Marcus felt different. He had crossed some invisible line, and entered a world where the old rules no longer applied, where white men and Apache could sit around the same fire and share food and conversation, even without speaking the same language. Marcus mounted Dusty and rode out of the canyon, carrying with him the memory of Ayana's grateful eyes and Chief Nailnish's solemn promise. He did not know when or how the chief intended to repay what he saw as a sacred debt, but Marcus had the feeling that their paths would cross again. As he rode through the morning sunshine, Marcus began to notice things about the desert that he had never seen before. The tracks of different animals, the way the light fell on certain rocks, the subtle signs that showed where water might be found underground. It was as if his encounter with the Apache had opened his eyes to a deeper understanding of this harsh but beautiful land. He also found himself thinking about Ayana and wondering how the giant Apache man was recovering from his injuries. There had been something impressive about the way Ayana had endured his pain without complaint, and something moving about the obvious love and respect his people had shown him. This was not the savage brutality that Marcus had been told characterized Apache society, but rather a close-knit community that cared deeply for its members. By midday, Marcus had reached the area where the wild horses had been reported. But as he searched the landscape, his mind kept returning to the events in the canyon. He realized that his simple act of human compassion had opened a door to a world he had never imagined, and he wondered what other surprises that world might hold for him in the days to come. 3 months had passed since Marcus Thompson's encounter with the Apache in the canyon. Summer had given way to autumn, and the desert mountains were painted in shades of gold and amber. Marcus had successfully captured and trained several wild mustangs during that time, selling them to settlers in the growing town of Millfield, about 50 miles east of where he had first met Ayana. Life had settled into a comfortable routine for Marcus. He had built a small cabin near a reliable water source and established corrals for his horses. His reputation as a fair and skilled horse trainer had spread among the settlers, and he had more work than he could handle. Yet despite his success, Marcus often found his thoughts drifting back to that night in the canyon and the promise Chief Nailnish had made. Marcus had learned more about the Apache people from other ranchers and travelers who passed through the area. Most of the stories were frightening tales of raids and violence, but Marcus noticed that these stories always seemed to be about Apache tribes far to the south and east. The local Apache, led by Chief Nailnish, were known for avoiding contact with white settlers rather than seeking conflict. One crisp October morning, Marcus was working with a particularly stubborn Mustang in his corral when he noticed dust rising in the distance. Someone was approaching his ranch, riding hard. As the rider drew closer, Marcus could see it was Jake Morrison, a young settler who lived with his family about 20 miles away. Jake's horse was lathered with sweat, and the young man's face was pale with fear and exhaustion. He barely managed to stop his horse before tumbling from the saddle, calling out urgently to Marcus. "Marcus, thank God you're here." Jake gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "You gotta help us. It's my little sister, Emma. She wandered off yesterday morning, and we can't find her anywhere." Marcus immediately dropped the rope he was holding and approached the exhausted young man. Jake Morrison was barely 20 years old, trying to make a living on a small homestead with his widowed mother and 8-year-old sister Emma. Marcus had met the family several times and knew them to be good, hardworking people who were struggling to survive in the harsh desert environment. "Calm down, Jake," Marcus said, offering the young man water from his well. "Tell me exactly what happened." Jake drank deeply before continuing. "Emma went out to gather firewood yesterday morning, like she always does. She knows the area around our place real well, never goes far. But when she didn't come back for lunch, we started looking for her." Jake's voice cracked with emotion. "We've searched everywhere, Marcus. Everywhere. We found some of her tracks leading toward the high country, but then they just disappeared." Marcus frowned. The high country was dangerous terrain, full of steep cliffs, hidden canyons, and wild animals. An 8-year-old girl could easily get lost up there, and even experienced trackers sometimes had trouble finding their way around a maze of rocks and ravines. "How many people are looking for her?" Marcus asked. "Just me and Ma, and old Tom Fletcher from the next ranch over," Jake replied miserably. "We asked some of the other settlers for help, but..." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. Marcus could guess what had happened. Many of the settlers were suspicious of each other and reluctant to leave their own properties undefended, even to help search for a lost child. The frontier was a place where people often had to put their own survival first, even when it meant being unable to help their neighbors. "Don't worry, Jake," Marcus said firmly. "We'll find her. Let me get my gear together, and we'll head out right away." As Marcus gathered his tracking equipment, rope, and supplies, he couldn't help thinking about little Emma Morrison. She was a bright, curious child with blonde pigtails and a smile that could light up a room. The thought of her alone and frightened somewhere in the wilderness made Marcus's chest tighten with worry. Marcus saddled Dusty and loaded his pack with enough supplies for several days if necessary. He also took his rifle, not because he expected trouble from people, but because the high country was home to mountain lions, bears, and other dangerous animals that might threaten a small child. The ride to the Morrison homestead took most of the morning. When they arrived, Marcus could see the desperation in Mrs. Morrison's red-rimmed eyes. She was a strong woman who had survived the death of her husband and the challenges of frontier life, but the disappearance of her daughter was testing her limits. "Oh, Marcus," she said, gripping his hands when he dismounted. "I'm so grateful you've come. I don't know what else to do. Emma is such a good girl. She never wanders off like this. Something must have happened to her." Tom Fletcher, a grizzled rancher in his 60s, approached them with a grim expression. "I've been tracking for 40 years, he said, "and I've never seen anything like this." The child's tracks head straight into the worst part of the high country, then just vanished like she sprouted wings and flew away. Marcus studied the ground around the Morrison cabin, looking for any clues the other searchers might have missed. He found Emma's tracks easily enough, small boot prints heading west toward the mountains. The tracks were clear and purposeful, suggesting that Emma had not been running or in panic when she left. Following the trail, Marcus led the group toward the foothills. The tracks remained clear for the first mile, then became more difficult to follow as the ground grew rocky and hard. But Marcus had learned tracking from his father, who had been one of the best in Texas, and he was able to continue following Emma's path even when the others could see no sign. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape became increasingly rugged. Deep canyons cut through the red rock, and ancient pines clung to impossible slopes. It was beautiful country, but also treacherous for anyone who did not know it well. After several hours of tracking, they reached the spot where Tom Fletcher had lost the trail. Marcus studied the ground carefully, walking in ever-widening circles as he searched for any sign of where Emma might have gone. The others watched anxiously as he worked, hoping he would be able to find something they had missed. Finally, Marcus found what he was looking for. Caught on a thorny bush about 30 yards from the last clear footprint was a small piece of blue fabric that matched the description of the dress Emma had been wearing when she disappeared. "She went this way," Marcus announced, pointing toward a narrow canyon that split off from the main trail. "But this is strange. Why would she leave the easy path to go into that rough country?" They followed the new direction, with Marcus leading the way and the others close behind. The canyon was narrow and winding, with steep walls on both sides that blocked out much of the sunlight. It was the kind of place that would be easy to get lost in, especially for a small child. About a mile into the canyon, they heard something that made them all stop and listen carefully. It was a faint sound, almost like someone calling for help, but it was too distant and echo-filled to be sure. "Emma," Mrs. Morrison called out, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Emma, honey, if you can hear me, call out." They waited in tense silence, straining to hear any response. After a long moment, they heard it again, definitely a human voice calling from somewhere deeper in the canyon. The group hurried forward, following the sound as best they could. The canyon floor was littered with loose rocks and fallen boulders, making travel slow and dangerous. Marcus worried that in their haste to reach Emma, one of them might slip and become injured themselves. As they rounded a sharp bend in the canyon, they came upon a sight that stopped them in their tracks. Ahead of them, the canyon opened into a small circular valley surrounded by high cliffs. In the center of the valley was a clear pool of water fed by a small waterfall. And sitting beside the pool, looking perfectly comfortable, was little Emma Morrison. But Emma was not alone. Sitting next to her, sharing what appeared to be dried meat and berries, was a young Apache woman about 18 or 19 years old. The two were chatting together as if they were old friends, despite the fact that they probably did not speak the same language. Mrs. Morrison cried out in relief and rushed toward her daughter, but Marcus caught her arm and held her back. He had spotted something that the others had missed. Around the edges of the valley, partially hidden in the shadows of the cliffs, were at least a dozen Apache warriors watching them carefully. "Wait," Marcus said quietly. "This is not what it looks like. Emma is safe, but we need to be very careful here." The young Apache woman had noticed their arrival and stood up gracefully. She spoke to Emma in what sounded like a mixture of Apache and simple English words, then walked calmly toward the group of searchers. As she approached, Marcus was struck by her remarkable beauty. She had long, dark hair that gleamed in the sunlight, intelligent dark eyes, and features that seemed to have been carved by a master artist. She wore traditional Apache clothing decorated with intricate beadwork, and she moved with the natural grace of someone who had spent her entire life in the wilderness. But what impressed Marcus most was the way she carried herself. There was no fear in her manner, despite being faced with four armed white people who had just discovered her in what was obviously Apache territory. Instead, she seemed calm and confident, like someone who was in complete control of the situation. The young woman stopped about 10 feet away from the group and spoke in careful English. "Do not be afraid. The child is safe. She was lost, and we found her." Mrs. Morrison started forward again, but the young Apache woman held up her hand in a gesture that was polite but firm. "Please, let me explain. The child wandered into our sacred place. She was frightened and hungry. We cared for her, but we could not leave our territory to return her." Marcus stepped forward, sensing that he might be the best one to handle this delicate situation. "We are very grateful that you helped her," he said. "We have been very worried. I am Marcus Thompson." At the mention of his name, the young woman's eyes widened in recognition. She turned and called out something in Apache to the hidden warriors. Immediately, several of them emerged from their hiding places and began walking toward the group. Marcus felt Jake and Tom Fletcher tense up beside him, and he hoped they would not do anything foolish. These Apache warriors were on their home ground and clearly outnumbered the searchers. Any aggressive action would likely end very badly for the white settlers. But instead of appearing threatening, the Apache warriors seemed excited and pleased. They were talking rapidly among themselves and pointing at Marcus. One of them, a tall man with an elaborate headdress, approached the group with a broad smile on his face. "Marcus Thompson," the warrior said in accented but clear English. "The horse tamer who saved Chief Nailnish's son. You are welcome here, friend to the Apache." Marcus recognized the man as one of the warriors who had been present when Ayanna was rescued from under the boulder. The memory of that night seemed like it had happened years ago rather than just a few months. "I remember you," Marcus replied. "How is Ayanna? Did he recover from his injuries?" "Ayanna is well, stronger than before," the warrior replied proudly. "He speaks often of the white man who saved his life. Chief Nailnish speaks of you also. Says the spirits sent you to prove that some white men have honor." The tension in the valley had completely changed now. What had started as a potential confrontation was now feeling more like a friendly reunion. The other Apache warriors gathered around Marcus, clearly eager to meet the man who had become something of a legend among their people. The young Apache woman who had been caring for Emma stepped forward again. "I am Ayanna's sister," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "My name is Kaya. Chief Nailnish is also my father." Marcus felt a strange flutter in his chest as he looked into Kaya's dark eyes. There was something about her that seemed to reach straight through to his soul, a connection that he had never experienced before. She was not only beautiful, but clearly intelligent and kind, as evidenced by the way she had cared for lost Emma. "Your father and brother saved my life too, in a way," Marcus said. "They taught me that Apache and white men can be friends." Kaya smiled at this, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "My father wishes to speak with you again," she said. "He has said that when the horse tamer returns to Apache land, he must come to our village as an honored guest." Before Marcus could respond, little Emma Morrison came running over to her mother, chattering excitedly about her adventure. "Mama, this is Kaya. She saved me when I got lost, and gave me food, and showed me how to make a whistle from a reed. And there are horses here, Mama, the most beautiful horses I've ever seen." Mrs. Morrison hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Emma, we were so worried about you. Don't ever wander off like that again." As the emotional reunion continued, Marcus found himself in conversation with Kaya and the Apache warriors. They explained that this hidden valley was a sacred place for their people, used for ceremonies and as a refuge during difficult times. Emma had wandered into it completely by accident, but once she was there, Apache law required that she be treated as a guest and protected. We could not take her from sacred ground, Kaya explained, but we also could not leave her to die in the wilderness. So we waited, knowing that her people would come looking for her, and that the spirits would guide them to this place. Marcus was amazed by the wisdom and patience this showed. Rather than simply returning Emma immediately and risking potential conflict with white settlers, the Apache had chosen to wait for the natural course of events to unfold. It was a solution that honored both their own laws and their responsibility to help a lost child. As the day wore on, it became clear that the Apache had no intention of letting their visitors leave immediately. This was partly due to genuine hospitality and partly because Chief Nailnish had learned of Marcus's presence and was riding to the valley to see him personally. The Apache warriors set up a comfortable camp for the white settlers, providing food, water, and warm blankets. Emma was delighted to be able to continue her adventure, playing games with Kaya and learning Apache words for different animals and plants. Marcus found himself spending most of the time talking with Kaya, who spoke English much better than he had initially realized. She had learned it from her father, who believed it was important for Apache leaders to understand the language and ways of the white settlers who were increasingly present in their traditional territory. "Your father is a wise leader," Marcus observed as they sat together watching Emma play with some of the younger Apache warriors. "He has to be," Kaya replied with a hint of sadness in her voice. "These are difficult times for our people. The world is changing quickly, and we must change with it or be destroyed." Marcus sensed that there was a great deal of weight on this young woman's shoulders. As the daughter of a chief, she would be expected to play an important role in her people's future. Yet she seemed to handle this responsibility with the same grace and wisdom that she had shown in caring for Emma. As the sun began to set, the sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of Chief Nailnish and his escort. Marcus stood respectfully as the chief entered the valley, remembering the dignity and authority the older man had displayed during their first meeting. Chief Nailnish dismounted and walked directly to Marcus, extending his hand in the white man's gesture of greeting. "Marcus Thompson," he said warmly, "the spirits have brought you back to us at an important time." "Chief Nailnish," Marcus replied, shaking the offered hand. "It is good to see you again. I hope Ayana has recovered fully from his injuries." "My son is well, thanks to your courage," the chief replied. Then, his expression became more serious. "But we have much to discuss, you and I. Important matters that concern both our peoples." As the evening progressed, Marcus learned more about the complex situation facing the Apache. White settlers were moving into the territory in increasing numbers, often without understanding or respecting Apache law and customs. Most conflicts arose from misunderstandings rather than deliberate aggression, but the results were the same: growing tension between two very different cultures trying to share the same land. Chief Nailnish believed that men like Marcus, who had shown they could bridge the gap between the two cultures, might be the key to preventing a war that would be devastating for everyone involved. The chief had been thinking about this ever since Marcus had risked his life to save Ayana, and now he had a proposal to make. But as the fire crackled and the stars appeared overhead, Marcus found himself far more interested in the young woman sitting across from him than in political discussions. Every time Kaya looked at him or spoke, he felt that strange flutter in his chest grow stronger. There was something happening between them that went beyond mere attraction, something that seemed to have been destined from the moment they first met. The evening would prove to be even more significant than Marcus could have imagined, setting in motion events that would change not only his life, but the relationship between two people struggling to find a way to live together in the vast and unforgiving landscape of the American Southwest. The fire cast dancing shadows across the faces gathered in the sacred valley as Chief Nailnish began to speak about matters that had weighed heavily on his heart for many months. Marcus Thompson sat with the Morrison family and Tom Fletcher, listening intently as the Apache leader shared his vision for a peaceful future between their peoples. "The old ways are changing," Chief Nailnish said, his voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom. More white settlers come each season, and our young warriors grow restless. They see their hunting grounds shrinking and their sacred places disturbed. Some speak of war, of driving all white men from Apache land. Marcus could feel the tension in this admission. Jake Morrison shifted uncomfortably, probably imagining Apache war parties attacking homesteads like his family's. But Chief Nailnish held up his hand for patience. But war brings only death and sorrow for all, the chief continued. I've seen what happens when peoples fight instead of finding ways to live together. The Apache will not survive if we choose only war. And the white settlers will face endless conflict if they choose only to take without giving respect. Kaya spoke up from where she sat near the fire, her voice clear and thoughtful. My father believes there must be men and women who can walk between both worlds, who understand both Apache ways and white man's ways. People who can speak for peace when others call for war. Marcus began to understand where this conversation was leading. The chief was not just sharing his thoughts randomly. He was leading toward a specific proposal. The realization made Marcus's pulse quicken, especially when he noticed the way Kaya's eyes remained fixed on his face as she spoke. Marcus Thompson, Chief Nailnish said formally, you saved the life of my son, but more than that, you showed honor to Apache people when you could have chosen to ride away. This tells me that you are a man who sees beyond the color of skin to the heart beneath. Mrs. Morrison spoke up hesitantly. Chief Nailnish, we are very grateful for how you and your people cared for Emma. We know now that the Apache are not the savage enemies we were told to fear. The chief nodded approvingly. This is good. Fear comes from not knowing. When people meet as we meet tonight, sharing food and fire and honest words, fear begins to die and understanding can grow. Tom Fletcher, who had remained silent through most of the evening, finally spoke. I've been ranching in this territory for 20 years, he said gruffly. Seen a lot of conflicts that didn't need to happen, a lot of good folks on both sides who died for no good reason. If there's a way to prevent more bloodshed, I'm listening. Chief Nailnish smiled at the old rancher's blunt honesty. It requires trust where there has been suspicion, friendship where there has been fear. The chief stood and walked to where Marcus was sitting. Marcus Thompson, I told you before that saving my son's life created a sacred debt between us. In Apache law, such a debt can only be repaid in a way that honors the magnitude of the gift received. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. There was something in the chief's tone and manner that suggested he was about to hear something that would change his life forever. Among my people, Chief Nailnish continued, the greatest honor that can be bestowed upon a man is to be welcomed not as a guest, but as family. To become part of the tribe, bound by blood and sacred law to protect, and serve the Apache people as his own. Kaya was watching Marcus intently now, and he could see something in her dark eyes that might have been hope. Around the fire, the other Apache warriors were nodding in agreement with their chief's words. I offer you my daughter Kaya as your wife, Chief Nailnish said simply, not as payment of a debt, but as the joining of two peoples through the sacred bond of marriage. You would become my son, and, through you, a bridge between Apache and white man's worlds. The silence that followed this announcement was deafening. Marcus felt as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. He looked at Kaya, trying to read her expression, wondering how she felt about her father's proposal. Was this something she wanted, or was she simply accepting her duty as a chief's daughter? Jake Morrison broke the silence first. That's quite an honor, he stammered, clearly not sure how to respond to such an unprecedented situation. Marcus stood slowly, his mind racing. The logical part of his brain told him that this was impossible. He was a white rancher who knew nothing about Apache culture and customs. How could he possibly become part of their tribe? What would the other white settlers think? What would his own family back in Texas think? But another part of his mind was drawn to the possibilities. He had felt a deep connection with Kaya from the moment they met, something that went beyond mere physical attraction. There was intelligence in her eyes, strength in her bearing, and kindness in her treatment of little Emma. Could he imagine spending his life with such a woman? Chief Nailnish, Marcus said carefully, this is a great honor, but also a great responsibility. I would need to understand what it would mean, both for me and for your daughter. Kaya spoke for the first time since her father's announcement. In Apache law, a woman may refuse any marriage, even one proposed by her father, she said quietly. I have not refused. Marcus felt his heart jump at these words. She had not refused. That meant she was at least willing to consider the idea, perhaps even wanted it. But, Kaya continued, such a marriage must be freely chosen by both parties. My father offers this union because he believes it would serve our people well. But I would only enter into it if both my heart and my mind agreed that it was right. Chief Nailnish nodded approvingly at his daughter's words. Kaya speaks wisdom. A marriage made only from duty brings neither happiness nor strength to a people. Both man and woman must choose freely. Marcus looked around the fire at the faces watching him. Mrs. Morrison looked shocked but not disapproving. Tom Fletcher seemed amazed but thoughtful. Jake Morrison appeared to be trying to process what he was hearing. What would such a marriage mean? Marcus asked. Would I have to give up my ranch, my life among the white settlers? No, Chief Nailnish replied. You would keep your ranch, your horses, your work. But you would also become Apache with all the responsibilities that brings. You would speak for our people when white men threaten our sacred places. You would teach white settlers our laws so they do not break them through ignorance. And when our young warriors speak of war, you would counsel peace and understanding. Kaya added, and I would learn the white man's ways so that I could speak to the women in the settlements, teach them that Apache mothers love their children just as white mothers do. Marcus was beginning to see the genius of Chief Nailnish's proposal. A mixed marriage between Apache and white would create living proof that the two peoples could unite peacefully. Children from such a union would naturally belong to both worlds and could serve as bridges between them. I need time to think about this, Marcus said finally. This is not a decision to be made quickly. Of course, Chief Nailnish agreed. Such a choice requires careful thought. But I ask that you consider not just what is good for Marcus Thompson, but what is good for all peoples who wish to share this land in peace. As the evening wore on, the conversation gradually turned to other topics. Emma Morrison entertained everyone by trying to teach Kaya some English words she had learned in school, while Kaya taught Emma the Apache names for various animals and plants. The easy friendship between the 8-year-old girl and the young Apache woman seemed to prove that Chief Nailnish's vision of peace was possible. Later, when most of the camp had settled down for the night, Marcus found himself sitting alone by the dying fire, trying to sort through his conflicted feelings. The smart thing would probably be to politely decline the chief's offer and return to his normal life. Marriage to an Apache woman would certainly complicate his relationships with white settlers, and there was no guarantee that such a union could really prevent the conflicts that seemed to be brewing. But as Marcus stared into the glowing embers, he kept thinking about Kaya. There was something about her that called to him in ways he had never experienced before. He had known other women, had even thought he was in love once or twice, but nothing had ever felt like this. You are thinking very hard. Kaya's voice came softly from behind him. Marcus turned to see her approaching, moving as silently as a shadow. She settled beside him at the fire, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of wildflowers in her hair. Your father's proposal surprised me, Marcus admitted. It surprised me as well, Kaya replied. But when I saw you with the lost child, saw how gently you treated her despite your worry for her safety, I began to think that perhaps my father's wisdom was greater than I had realized. Marcus looked at her profile in the firelight, noting the delicate curve of her cheek and the intelligent set of her features. What do you think about the idea? He asked. Honestly, Kaya was quiet for a long moment before answering. I think that the spirits sometimes arrange meetings that seem like accidents, but are really destiny. I think that a man who would risk his life to save a stranger from another tribe is a man who might understand that love can cross any boundary. Marcus felt his breath catch. And do you think love could cross the boundary between us? Kaya turned to look directly into his eyes. I think it already has. The honesty in her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. She was right, he realized. What he was feeling was not just attraction or curiosity, but something much deeper and more powerful. He was falling in love with this remarkable Apache woman, despite having known her for less than a day. Kaya, he said softly, reaching out to touch her hand. Are you sure about this? Marriage to a white man would change your life completely. You would face criticism from some of your own people, just as I would from mine. I'm sure of my heart, Kaya replied, her fingers intertwining with his. But my heart alone is not enough. Such a marriage must serve not just our happiness, but the greater good of both our peoples. Are you strong enough to bear that weight? Marcus thought about the responsibility she was describing. It would mean becoming a spokesman for the Apache among white settlers who might see him as a traitor. It would mean defending white settlers from Apache warriors who might see them as enemies. It would mean walking a narrow line between two worlds, never fully belonging to either one. But looking into Kaya's eyes, Marcus realized that some choices were made not by the mind but by the heart. And his heart had already decided. "I'm strong enough," he said firmly. "With you beside me, I'm strong enough for anything." Kaya smiled, and in that smile Marcus saw his entire future. It would not be an easy future, but it would be one filled with purpose and love and the knowledge that he was helping to build something better than what had existed before. "Then, we should speak to my father in the morning," Kaya said. "There are many preparations to be made if we are to do this properly." As they sat together by the dying fire, Marcus marveled at how quickly his life had changed. A few days ago, he had been a simple horse rancher with no greater ambition than to build a successful business. Now he was about to become the husband of an Apache chief's daughter and a bridge between two cultures that desperately needed to find a way to coexist. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as word of the proposed marriage spread through the Apache camp. Marcus was amazed to discover that many of the warriors had been hoping for exactly this kind of development. They saw him as proof that not all white men were enemies, and they believed that his marriage to Kaya could open doors to peaceful negotiations with other settlers. Mrs. Morrison and her family were preparing to return to their homestead, grateful beyond words for the safe return of little Emma. Before they left, Mrs. Morrison spoke privately with Marcus. "I know this seems sudden and strange," she said, "but I've watched you with that young woman, and I've seen how she looks at you. If you truly love her, then you have my blessing. God knows this territory could use more peace and less conflict." Tom Fletcher was more blunt in his assessment. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest," he said with a grin. "But if anyone can make this work, it's you. Just remember that there are good folks on both sides who want to live in peace. Don't let the troublemakers on either side convince you otherwise." Chief Nailnish informed Marcus that the proper Apache ceremony for such a marriage would require several days of preparation. There were rituals to be performed, gifts to be exchanged, and important members of the tribe to be consulted. The marriage would not just be a union between two individuals, but a formal alliance between peoples. "In our law," the chief explained, "when a man marries the daughter of a chief, he becomes responsible not just for her welfare, but for the welfare of her entire people. Are you prepared for this responsibility?" Marcus looked around the camp at the faces watching him expectantly. These people were entrusting him with something precious, their hope for a peaceful future. It was a weight that would have crushed many men, but Marcus felt only determination to prove himself worthy of their trust. "I am prepared," he said formally. "I will honor the Apache people as my own family, and I will work to build understanding between our peoples for as long as I live." Chief Nailnish nodded solemnly, then broke into a rare smile. "Then, let the preparations begin. In 1 week's time, Marcus Thompson will become my son, and the Apache will gain a new warrior for peace." As the busy day continued, Marcus found himself learning about Apache customs and traditions with Kaya as his patient teacher. There were specific prayers to be memorized, ceremonial clothing to be prepared, and important protocols to be observed. It was overwhelming, but also exciting to be welcomed so completely into a culture that had been foreign to him just a few days before. But beneath all the activity and preparation, Marcus was most aware of the growing connection between himself and Kaya. Every conversation deepened his respect for her intelligence and wisdom. Every shared glance strengthened his conviction that he was making the right choice. By the time the sun set on this remarkable day, Marcus Thompson knew that his life as a simple horse rancher was ending, and his new life as a bridge between worlds was about to begin. The week of preparation for Marcus and Kaya's wedding passed like a dream filled with new experiences, emotions, and challenges that Marcus had never imagined facing. Each day brought deeper immersion into Apache culture and traditions, as well as growing intimacy between him and his bride-to-be. Marcus learned that Apache marriages were not simple ceremonies, but complex rituals that bound not just two individuals together, but connected their families, clans, and communities in networks of mutual responsibility and support. As the future husband of a chief's daughter, Marcus would be expected to understand and honor these connections for the rest of his life. Kaya taught him the proper prayers and songs that would be part of their ceremony, patiently correcting his pronunciation of Apache words until he could speak them with confidence. She also began teaching him about the spiritual beliefs that guided Apache life, explaining how her people saw themselves as caretakers of the land rather than masters of it. "We believe that everything in nature has a spirit," Kaya explained as they walked together through the hidden valley. "The rocks, the trees, the animals, even the wind itself. When white settlers cut down ancient trees or pollute sacred springs, they're not just damaging objects, they're harming living beings that have spirits older than memory." Marcus began to understand why conflict arose between Apache and white settlers. It was not just about territory or resources, but about completely different ways of understanding humanity's relationship with the natural world. Most white settlers saw land as something to be owned and exploited, while Apache people saw it as a living community of which they were just one part. "How can I help white settlers understand this?" Marcus asked. "How can I make them see that Apache concerns are not just stubbornness or superstition?" Kaya smiled at his earnest desire to bridge the gap between their peoples. "You begin by helping them see that Apache people are not so different from themselves. We love our children. We mourn our dead. We hope for good futures. When white settlers understand that we're people like them, then they can begin to understand that our beliefs come from wisdom, not ignorance." During this week of preparation, Marcus also spent time with Ayana, whose recovery from his injuries had indeed been complete. The giant Apache warrior had become something of a legend among his people, not just for surviving being trapped under the boulder, but for the friendship he had forged with the white man who saved him. "My sister has chosen well," Ayana told Marcus as they practiced with traditional Apache weapons. "But marriage to a chief's daughter brings great honor and great danger. There will be those among your people who see you as a traitor, and those among our people who see you as an invader. You must be stronger than both their fears and their hatred." Marcus was learning to use an Apache bow, which was shorter but more powerful than the rifles he was accustomed to. Ayana was teaching him not just the physical skills of archery, but the spiritual discipline that Apache warriors brought to their training. "A weapon is only as strong as the spirit of the person who wields it," Ayana explained. "If your spirit is conflicted or uncertain, your aim will be poor. If your spirit is clear and focused on protecting what you love, you cannot miss your target." As Marcus drew back the bowstring and aimed at a target carved into a distant tree, he thought about what he was protecting. He was protecting Kaya, of course, and their future together. But he was also protecting the hope of peace between Apache and white settlers, the possibility that two different peoples could share the same land without destroying each other. The arrow flew straight and true, striking the center of the target. Ayana nodded approvingly. "Your spirit is becoming clear," he said. "This is good. You will need that clarity in the days to come." Meanwhile, word of the upcoming marriage had spread to the white settlements, creating reactions that ranged from curiosity to outrage. Some settlers saw it as a hopeful sign that peaceful coexistence might be possible. Others viewed it as a betrayal of white solidarity in hostile territory. Tom Fletcher rode to Marcus's ranch to report what he was hearing in the settlements. "Most folks are just confused," he said. "They don't know what to make of it. But there are some who are talking about organizing to stop the wedding, saying it sets a dangerous precedent." Marcus felt a chill of worry. "What kind of organizing?" "Nothing definite yet," Fletcher replied. "But there's talk about petitioning the territorial government to declare such marriages illegal. Some of the hotheads are even talking about more direct action." Marcus realized that his marriage to Kaya might face opposition more serious than simple social disapproval. There could be legal challenges or even violence from those who saw mixed marriages as threatening to white dominance in the territory. "What do you think I should do?" Marcus asked the older rancher. Fletcher considered carefully before answering. "I think you should go ahead with the marriage, but be prepared for trouble. And I think you should make sure you have friends among the white settlers who will stand up for you when the opposition gets organized." That evening, Marcus shared his concerns with Kaya and Chief Nailnish. The Apache leader listened thoughtfully, then nodded as if he had been expecting such problems. "There are always those who choose fear over hope," the chief said. "Among my own people, there are warriors who think I am foolish to trust any white man. They say that all whites are enemies who must be driven away or destroyed. Kaya spoke up with quiet determination. If we let fear control our choices, then the fearful ones win. Our marriage will happen as planned. Let those who oppose it show their true nature, and let those who support peace stand with us. Marcus was moved by her courage and felt his own resolve strengthen. They were not just getting married for their own happiness, but to prove that love and understanding could overcome prejudice and hatred. The night before the wedding, Marcus lay awake in his tent thinking about how much his life had changed in such a short time. A few weeks ago, he had been a solitary horse rancher with few responsibilities beyond caring for his animals and running his business. Tomorrow, he would become the husband of an Apache chief's daughter and a symbol of hope for peaceful coexistence between two cultures. The weight of that responsibility was daunting, but Marcus no longer had any doubts about his choice. His love for Kaya had grown deeper each day, but more than that, he had come to believe passionately in the vision that Chief Nailnish had shared with him. A future where Apache and white settlers could live together, respecting each other's differences while working toward common goals. The wedding ceremony began at dawn with purification rituals for both bride and groom. Marcus was painted with sacred symbols and dressed in traditional Apache clothing that had been specially made for him. The garments were beautiful works of art, decorated with intricate beadwork and feathers that told the story of his acceptance into the tribe. Kaya appeared dressed in white deerskin adorned with silver and turquoise jewelry that had been passed down through generations of Apache women. She looked so beautiful that Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. But more than her physical beauty, he was struck by the serenity and strength she radiated as she prepared to take this momentous step. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. It involved not just spoken vows, but elaborate rituals that symbolized the joining of two lives and two peoples. There were prayers in Apache, ceremonial sharing of food and water, and the exchange of gifts that represented the couple's commitment to support each other through all of life's challenges. Chief Nailnish performed the central part of the ceremony, speaking in both Apache and English so that the meaning would be clear to everyone present. Today we witness not just the marriage of two individuals, but the birth of a bridge between peoples, he declared. Marcus Thompson, you cease to be only a white man. Kaya, daughter of chiefs, you remain Apache, but become also the wife of one who was born in a different world. Together, you become something new, hope made flesh. When Marcus and Kaya spoke their vows to each other, they promised not just love and faithfulness, but also dedication to the cause of peace and understanding. They pledged to raise their children to honor both Apache and white traditions, to work toward healing the divisions between their peoples, and to stand together against those who would choose hatred over love. As the ceremony concluded and Marcus kissed his new wife, the Apache warriors who had gathered to witness the marriage began a celebration that would continue for 3 days. There was drumming and dancing, feasting, and storytelling, all designed to honor the new couple and welcome Marcus fully into the tribe. But even as the celebration reached its peak, Marcus noticed riders approaching the hidden valley. Tom Fletcher was leading a small group of white settlers toward the wedding site. Marcus felt a moment of anxiety, wondering if these were opponents coming to cause trouble. Instead, he was amazed to discover that Fletcher had brought supporters. Mrs. Morrison was there with her children, along with several other settler families who wanted to show their approval of the marriage. Even more surprising, Fletcher had convinced a circuit preacher named Reverend Williams to attend, lending religious legitimacy to the Apache ceremony. I figured you might want this to be legal under white man's law, as well as Apache law, Fletcher explained with a grin. Reverend Williams has agreed to perform a Christian ceremony as well, if you and Kaya are willing. Marcus looked at his new wife, who nodded her agreement. Having their marriage recognized by both cultures would strengthen its symbolic importance and might help win over some white settlers who would otherwise be skeptical. The Christian ceremony was brief and simple compared to the elaborate Apache ritual, but it was witnessed by both Apache and white settlers standing together in the sacred valley. When Reverend Williams pronounced Marcus and Kaya husband and wife according to Christian tradition, both communities cheered their approval. As the sun set on this remarkable day, Marcus reflected on what they had accomplished. Two people from completely different worlds had joined their lives together, but more than that, they had created a living example of the kind of cooperation and understanding that could transform the entire territory. However, Marcus also knew that their marriage was just the beginning. The real test would come in the months and years ahead, as they worked to fulfill the promise of their union and prove that peace between Apache and white settlers was not just a beautiful dream, but an achievable reality. That night, as Marcus and Kaya settled into their new home in the Apache village, they talked about their hopes and plans for the future. They dreamed of a time when Apache children and white children could play together without fear, when Apache wisdom about living in harmony with nature could be combined with white knowledge of technology and agriculture, when conflicts would be resolved through conversation rather than violence. "It will not be easy," Kaya said softly as they lay together under the stars. "There will be setbacks and disappointments. Some people will never accept what we represent. But we will keep trying," Marcus replied, holding her close. "And maybe if we are patient and strong and wise, we can help create the kind of world that Chief Nailnish envisions." As they drifted off to sleep on their wedding night, neither Marcus nor Kaya could have imagined the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. Their marriage had been just the beginning of a story that would touch the lives of countless people and help shape the future of the American Southwest. The seeds of peace had been planted in a sacred valley where a white horse rancher had married an Apache chief's daughter for love, for hope, and for the dream that two peoples could become one without either losing their essential identity. Whether those seeds would grow and flourish would depend on the courage, wisdom, and determination of all those who shared the vision of a better world. 2 years after their wedding, Marcus and Kaya Thompson had established themselves as the most important bridge between the Apache people and the white settlers in the Arizona Territory. Their marriage had proven to be far more than a romantic union. It had become a foundation for a new kind of relationship between two cultures that had previously seen each other only as enemies. Marcus and Kaya now divided their time between two homes: the Apache village where Kaya had been raised, and a new ranch that Marcus had built at the boundary between Apache territory and white settlement lands. This ranch had become a meeting place where representatives from both cultures could gather to discuss problems, negotiate agreements, and work toward peaceful solutions to conflicts. The couple's success in preventing violence and misunderstandings had earned them respect from both communities, but it had also made them targets for extremists on both sides who preferred conflict to cooperation. Marcus had survived 2 assassination attempts by white vigilantes who saw him as a traitor to his race. Kaya had faced threats from Apache warriors who believed she had betrayed her people by marrying a white man. But their work had also produced remarkable results. Conflicts that once would have escalated into deadly raids were now being resolved through negotiation. Apache knowledge of desert survival and sustainable hunting was being shared with white settlers, helping them adapt to their harsh environment. White medical knowledge and agricultural techniques were being adapted for use by Apache communities, improving their health and food security. On this particular autumn morning, Marcus was preparing for one of the most important negotiations of his career. A large group of new settlers had arrived in the territory with plans to establish a major farming community in an area that the Apache considered sacred. The settlers had legal papers from the territorial government giving them the right to claim the land, but the Apache were prepared to fight to prevent its desecration. Kaya was now visibly pregnant with her first child, due to be born in the spring. The pregnancy had been difficult, requiring her to reduce her travel and diplomatic activities, but she continued to serve as an advisor and translator for the complex negotiations that were Marcus's daily work. "The Council of Elders is very upset about this latest group of settlers," Kaya told Marcus as they shared breakfast in their ranch house. "They chose that particular valley because they believed it was too sacred for white men to ever want it. The springs there are where Apache people have come for healing ceremonies for hundreds of years." Marcus frowned as he studied the maps and legal documents spread across their kitchen table. "And the settlers chose it because those same springs make it perfect for irrigation farming. They have no idea of its spiritual significance to your people. Can you make them understand?" Kaya asked. "Can you help them see that there are other valleys, other sources of water that would serve their needs without destroying something sacred?" Marcus had learned over the past 2 years that such negotiations required careful preparation and patience. He could not simply tell the settlers that they could not use land legally granted to them by the government. Instead, he had to find creative solutions that would meet everyone's most important needs. "I have an idea," Marcus said, "but it will require your father and the council to trust me to make some difficult compromises." Later that morning, Marcus rode to the Apache village to meet with Chief Nailnish and the tribal council. The atmosphere was tense, with many of the older warriors arguing for immediate action to drive the new settlers away before they could establish permanent camps near the sacred springs. "These whites have no respect for anything," declared Dakota, a war chief who had always been skeptical of Marcus's diplomatic approach. "They see land only as something to be used and exploited. Give them one sacred valley, and they will soon want them all." Marcus listened respectfully to all the concerns and anger expressed by the council members before presenting his proposal. "What if we could convince the settlers to establish their community in a different location, one that would actually serve their needs better than the sacred valley?" "How?" Chief Nailnish asked. "They have legal papers. They believe they have the right to take any land they want, because they don't understand the true value of what they're giving up," Marcus explained. "The sacred valley has springs, but the water flow is limited. If they try to irrigate large farms there, the springs will run dry within a few years. But there's another valley about 20 miles east that has a year-round river and much more fertile soil." Young Bear, one of the Apache scouts, shook his head skeptically. "Why would they believe you about this other valley? And even if they did, why would they give up land they already claim for land they would have to negotiate for?" Marcus pulled out a detailed map he had been working on for weeks. "Because I've surveyed both areas extensively, and I can prove that the Eastern Valley is better for farming. And because the Apache Nation will offer them something valuable in exchange for avoiding the Sacred Valley." Chief Nailnish leaned forward with interest. "What would we offer?" "Partnership," Marcus said simply. "Apache guides to help them navigate the territory safely. Apache knowledge about which plants and animals are safe to eat, where to find water during droughts, how to build shelters that can survive desert storms. In exchange for respecting the Sacred Valley, the Apache would help ensure the settlers' survival and success." The council members looked at each other with surprise. This was a radically different approach from anything that had been tried before. Instead of simply demanding that the settlers leave, Marcus was proposing a mutual assistance agreement that would benefit both sides. Dakota remained skeptical. "And what happens when these settlers become strong and numerous and decide they no longer need Apache help? What prevents them from taking the Sacred Valley anyway?" "Legal protections," Marcus replied. "I've been working with territorial officials and lawyers in the capital. If the Apache Nation formally cedes the Sacred Valley to the territorial government as a protected religious site, it will have the same legal status as a Christian church or cemetery. No one will be able to develop it without facing federal prosecution." This was an unprecedented proposal that would require the Apache to trust in white man's laws to protect their sacred places. Many of the council members were uncomfortable with the idea, but Chief Nailnish saw the wisdom in it. "If we have no protection under white man's law, we can only protect our sacred places through constant fighting," the chief observed. "But if their own laws protect us, then their own government becomes our ally instead of our enemy." The debate continued for several hours, with Marcus answering detailed questions about the legal process and the practical aspects of his proposal. Finally, the council agreed to let him approach the settlers with their offer, provided he could get binding legal commitments that would permanently protect the Sacred Valley. The next challenge was convincing the settlers to consider his alternative proposal. Marcus arranged to meet with their leaders at his ranch, knowing that the neutral setting would be important for productive negotiations. The leader of the new settlement group was a man named James Crawford, a former Union Army officer who had brought his extended family west in search of farmland and new opportunities. Crawford was accompanied by his brother William, his grown son Robert, and 2 other families who had pooled their resources to purchase equipment and supplies for the new community. "Mr. Thompson," Crawford said as they gathered around the large table in Marcus's main room, "we appreciate your willingness to meet with us, but I should tell you up front that we're not interested in being told we can't use land that we've legally acquired." Marcus nodded understandingly. "I'm not here to tell you that you can't use your land. I'm here to suggest that you might not want to use it once you understand what you'd be giving up in exchange. Over the next hour, Marcus presented detailed information about both the Sacred Valley and the alternative Eastern Valley. He showed soil samples, water flow measurements, climate data, and agricultural projections that demonstrated the superior farming potential of the eastern location. The Sacred Valley looks attractive because of the springs, Marcus explained, but those springs have a limited flow rate that won't support large-scale irrigation. Within 3 years, you'll be facing water shortages that could destroy your crops and force you to abandon your investment. Crawford studied the data carefully. As a former military officer, he was accustomed to making decisions based on practical intelligence rather than emotional reactions. This Eastern Valley you're proposing, who owns it now? It's still public land, available for homesteading under the same laws you used to claim the Sacred Valley, Marcus replied. But, more importantly, it comes with something the Sacred Valley doesn't: Apache partnership. William Crawford spoke up skeptically. What does that mean exactly? Partnership with Indians doesn't sound like something most folks would see as an advantage. Marcus spent considerable time explaining the practical benefits of Apache cooperation. The Apache knew desert survival techniques that could mean the difference between life and death for settlers. They understood seasonal weather patterns, knew which plants had medicinal value, and could provide early warning about potential threats from hostile tribes or natural disasters. Your success in this territory doesn't depend just on having good farmland, Marcus emphasized. It depends on being able to survive and thrive in an environment that's completely different from anything you've experienced. The Apache have been succeeding in this environment for centuries. Their knowledge could save your community from disasters that have destroyed other settlement attempts. Robert Crawford, James's son, had been listening intently to the presentation. This makes sense from a practical standpoint, he said. But what guarantee do we have that the Apache would honor such an agreement? And what's to prevent conflicts with other Apache groups who aren't part of this deal? Marcus was prepared for this question. Chief Nailnish leads a confederation of Apache bands that control most of this territory. Any agreement made with him would be honored by all the bands under his authority. As for enforcement, we would establish a formal treaty that would be recognized by the territorial government and backed by federal authority. The negotiations continued over several days, with breaks for both sides to consult with their constituencies. Marcus found himself serving as translator not just of languages, but of entire worldviews, helping each group understand the motivations and concerns of the other. The breakthrough came when Kaya, despite her pregnancy and doctor's orders to rest, insisted on participating in one of the negotiation sessions. Her presence changed the entire dynamic of the discussions. "I want to show you something," Kaya said to the Crawford family, leading them to a window that overlooked the valley where Marcus kept his horses. "Do you see those horses? 2 years ago, they were wild Mustangs that had never been touched by human hands. They were beautiful and free, but also constantly in danger from predators, drought, and starvation." The settlers watched as Marcus worked with the horses, gentling a young stallion with patience and respect rather than force. "My husband could have captured those horses with ropes and broken their spirits with violence," Kaya continued. "Instead, he chose to earn their trust and partnership. Now they are still beautiful and strong, but they're also fed regularly, protected from predators, and cared for when they are sick or injured. They gave up some freedom, but they gained security and purpose." James Crawford understood the metaphor immediately. "You're suggesting that cooperation between our peoples could benefit everyone involved, even though it requires giving up some independence." "Exactly," Kaya replied. "The Apache are not asking you to give up your dreams of farming and building communities. We are asking you to pursue those dreams in partnership with us, rather than in opposition to us." That evening, the Crawford family asked for a private meeting with Marcus and Kaya. James Crawford spoke for the group. "We've decided to accept your proposal," he said. "We'll relocate our settlement to the Eastern Valley in exchange for Apache partnership and protection of the Sacred Valley. But we have one additional request." Marcus and Kaya exchanged glances, wondering what this unexpected request might be. "We want you to serve as our official liaison with the Apache Nation," Crawford continued. "Not just for this agreement, but permanently. We need someone who understands both cultures and can help prevent misunderstandings that could lead to conflicts." Marcus felt the weight of this new responsibility but also the opportunity it represented. What exactly would that role involve? You would be our representative in all dealings with the Apache and the Apache representative in all dealings with our community, Crawford explained. You would help establish trade relationships, resolve disputes, and coordinate any cooperative projects. In essence, you would become the bridge between our two peoples. Kaya smiled at her husband. It appears the spirits have shown you your true calling, she said softly. Over the next several months, Marcus worked tirelessly to implement the agreement between the Apache Nation and the Crawford settlement. The legal protections for the Sacred Valley were established through territorial law, creating the first Native American religious preserve in the Arizona Territory. The Crawford community successfully established their farms in the Eastern Valley, benefiting from Apache guidance about desert agriculture and weather patterns. The partnership exceeded everyone's expectations. Apache hunters provided fresh meat for the settlement during the difficult first winter. White farmers shared surplus crops during Apache ceremonies and festivals. Children from both communities began learning each other's languages and playing together, creating friendships that would last for generations. But the success of the Apache-Crawford partnership also attracted attention from hostile forces. A group of territorial politicians and businessmen, led by a corrupt official named Senator Bradley, saw the growing cooperation between Native Americans and white settlers as a threat to their plans for exploiting territorial resources. Senator Bradley had been planning to acquire large tracts of Apache land through manipulation of territorial laws and forced relocations. The success of Marcus's diplomatic approach threatened to establish legal precedents that would protect Native American rights and limit opportunities for land speculation and resource extraction. In the spring of 1875, as Kaya prepared to give birth to their first child, Marcus received word that Senator Bradley was organizing a campaign to have the Apache-Crawford Treaty declared illegal and void. Bradley claimed that Native Americans did not have the legal authority to enter into formal agreements with white communities, and that such partnerships violated federal Indian policy. He wants to create a test case that will overturn all the protections we've established, Marcus explained to Chief Nailnish during an emergency council meeting. If he succeeds, it won't just affect our local agreements. It could set a precedent that prevents Native American communities throughout the territory from protecting their land and rights through legal means. Chief Nailnish was not surprised by this development. There are always those who profit from conflict and suffering, he said grimly. They see peace as an enemy to their ambitions. The legal battle that followed tested everything that Marcus and Kaya had worked to build. Senator Bradley used his political connections to pressure territorial officials and federal Indian agents to condemn the Apache-Crawford partnership as illegal and dangerous. He organized rallies in distant towns where speakers denounced Marcus as a traitor who was helping savages resist American progress and development. Meanwhile, hostile Apache bands from other territories, encouraged by Bradley's agents, began making threats against the Crawford settlement and any Apache who cooperated with white settlers. These outside agitators hoped to provoke violent incidents that would destroy the peaceful partnership and justify aggressive military action against all Apache peoples. Marcus found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts: legal challenges in territorial courts, political pressure from Washington, threats of violence from extremists, and attempts to discredit his character and motives in territorial newspapers. The crisis reached its peak in late spring, just as Kaya went into labor with her first child. Marcus was torn between his duty to be with his wife during childbirth and his responsibility to appear in court for the most important legal hearing in the case. Chief Nailnish made the decision for him. A man's first duty is to his wife and child, the chief declared. We will handle the court hearing. Your place is with Kaya. Marcus's son was born during a thunderstorm that seemed to shake the entire desert. As he held the tiny infant for the first time, Marcus was overwhelmed by the realization that this child would grow up in whatever world they succeeded in creating. Would it be a world of cooperation and peace, or one of perpetual conflict and division? The baby's mixed Apache and white heritage made him a living symbol of the bridge between cultures that his parents represented. But it also made him a target for those who opposed racial mixing and cultural cooperation. What should we name him? Marcus asked Kaya as she rested after the difficult birth. In Apache tradition, a child's true name is revealed through signs and omens, Kaya replied weakly. But For now, let us call him Joseph, after the biblical son who served as a bridge between his people and a foreign land. While Marcus was helping his wife recover and bonding with his newborn son, Chief Nailnish and his allies were fighting for the survival of their diplomatic achievements in territorial court. The hearing had drawn attention from across the territory, with supporters and opponents of the Apache-Crawford partnership traveling to the capital to witness the proceedings. Tom Fletcher, now in his 70s but still vigorous, testified about the practical benefits of Apache settler cooperation. The Crawford family presented evidence of their community's success and growth under the partnership agreement. Apache leaders spoke eloquently about their desire for peace and their willingness to share the land with respectful neighbors. But Senator Bradley had organized an impressive array of opposition witnesses. Military officers testified about the alleged dangers of treating Native Americans as equals. Land speculators claimed that partnerships with primitive peoples would slow territorial development and economic growth. Politicians argued that local agreements with Native American tribes violated federal authority and set dangerous precedents. The territorial judge, Samuel Harrison, was known to be honest but also conservative in his interpretation of law and federal policy. His decision would either validate the new approach to Native American relations or destroy everything that Marcus and his allies had worked to achieve. After 3 days of testimony and deliberation, Judge Harrison announced his ruling. The courtroom was packed with representatives from both communities, newspaper reporters from across the territory, and political observers from Washington. This court finds, Judge Harrison began, that the agreement between the Apache Nation and the Crawford settlement community represents an innovative and constructive approach to the challenges of territorial development and Native American relations. Marcus, who had arrived at the courthouse immediately after receiving word of the decision, felt his heart leap with hope. However, the judge continued, this court also recognizes the complex legal and political issues raised by such agreements. Therefore, this court rules that while the current Apache-Crawford partnership may continue to operate under territorial protection, no similar agreements may be negotiated without explicit approval from federal Indian authorities. The ruling was a partial victory that preserved their existing achievements while limiting their ability to expand the model to other communities. Senator Bradley claimed success in preventing the dangerous precedent he had warned against. Apache leaders and settler supporters celebrated the survival of their partnership while acknowledging the constraints placed on future development. For Marcus and Kaya, the court decision marked the end of one phase of their work and the beginning of another. They had proven that peaceful cooperation between Apache and white communities was possible and beneficial. Now, they faced the challenge of nurturing and protecting that cooperation while working within the constraints imposed by political opposition. As they sat together in their ranch house, watching their infant son sleep peacefully in Kaya's arms, Marcus reflected on how much their lives had changed since that night in the canyon when he had saved Ayana from beneath the fallen boulder. "Do you ever regret the path we chose?" Marcus asked his wife quietly. Kaya smiled and touched her son's tiny hand. "How can I regret choices that brought us to this moment? We have love, we have family, we have hope for the future. Not everyone can say the same." Marcus looked out the window at the desert landscape that had become his home, watching Apache and white children playing together in the distance. Despite all the challenges and conflicts they had faced, despite the political opposition and threats of violence, they had created something precious, a community where people of different cultures could live and work together in peace. Their son Joseph would grow up in that community, learning Apache wisdom from his grandfather Chief Nailnish and frontier skills from his father Marcus. He would be fluent in both languages and comfortable in both cultures, a living bridge between worlds that had once seemed hopelessly divided. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Marcus Thompson felt a deep sense of satisfaction and hope. He had found his calling not just in marrying the woman he loved, but in helping to build a better world for their children and all the generations that would follow. The story that began with a simple act of compassion, saving a trapped man from beneath a fallen boulder, had grown into something far greater. Proof that human beings of any culture or background could choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over hatred, and hope over fear. In the years to come, the Apache-Crawford partnership would serve as a model for peaceful relations between Native Americans and white settlers throughout the Southwest. Marcus and Kaya's children would grow up to become leaders in their own right, continuing their parents' work of building bridges between cultures and communities. And the Sacred Valley, protected by law and honored by both peoples, would remain a place where Apache families could continue their ancient ceremonies and healing rituals, secure in the knowledge that some things are too precious to be destroyed for the sake of temporary gain. The bond between Chief Nailnish and the white man who had saved his son's life had grown into something that neither of them had imagined possible. The foundation for a new way of living together on the land they both loved, with respect for each other's differences and commitment to their shared future.